documenting the front lines of the AI revolution, the AI Rebels podcast.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the AI Rebels podcast. We're very excited to have Valorie Jones, the CTO of StoryFile, here with us today, and we are very excited about everything StoryFile is working on. Valorie, thank you for coming on with us. We're excited to have a little bit of your time here.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. Could you do, for our listeners, a quick intro of your path in AI to where you're at now with StoryFile?
Yes. So StoryFile is a conversational video platform. We enable the ability to take real people, interview them, like you're doing here with me, but then turn them into interactive video. So people anywhere in the world can go ask questions, and the StoryFile engine will find the best video response and play it back. So you can have conversations with people who you would not usually get to meet. You could talk to an astronaut, or you could talk to a famous civil rights leader or a World War II veteran. And this is really useful for lots of educational applications. It's useful. We have a lot of installations in museums, but also businesses who want to, maybe you get to talk to the CEO on the very first day you join a company. Now, my background, originally, I was at the University of Southern California as a researcher at the Institute for Creative Technologies. And that was founded back in 1999 with a collaboration with the US Army, who basically wanted to build a holodeck. They were looking at everything that was happening in the movie industry and the game industry and said, we need a piece of that. That looks better than anything we're doing. And if we could just say, dial up 100 people in Iraq and train soldiers, that's going to create a lot more compelling training before people actually deploy into the field. Now, in order to create a virtual Iraq, you need real human engagement. And a lot of that is, people aren't just going around shooting guns. They need to negotiate, need to interact with people, have interpersonal skills. So where I was working on was a group that was trying to scan real people, get their likenesses, photoreal digital humans, and have them talk and interact with you. So we created a device called the Light Stage that was for 3D scanning that ended up winning multiple Academy Awards. It was used often on big feature films like Avatar and Logan, where they needed people to do things that they couldn't physically do, so they would create digital versions of them. So amongst all of this, in 2010, I was approached by some folks from the USC Shoah Foundation. This is a bit of a right turn for me. The USC Shoah Foundation was founded by Steven Spielberg to capture all the testimonies of Holocaust survivors. And this was going back to the time when he was doing Schindler's List and actually before then. And they had captured about 40,000 testimonies. But they had a sort of a problem, which was that people were not really experiencing these stories. Unless you're a grad student going into a library with a homework assignment, you might not watch these videos. But if you think of 2010, if you went into a actual physical museum, there was a decent chance there might be a Holocaust survivor volunteering at that museum who you could talk to. And there's a really big difference between meeting someone face to face and having a conversation and reading about it in a book or watching a movie. It becomes like, this is a real lived experience that affected real human lives. But at that point, most Holocaust survivors were in their 80s and 90s. The clock was ticking. So could we use all this AI technology to preserve that experience of talking to a real Holocaust survivor? So we started off with a survivor named Pinker Scooter, who was originally in his teens during the Holocaust. And we interviewed him for 7 days. Wow. He's basically capturing his entire life story. There's about 1,000 questions that everyone typically asks a Holocaust survivor. And based on that, we could then create this interactive database using a lot of his technology to interact with him. And prior to this, we had created these digital humans, but they've pretty much all been very highly scripted. Like, they sort of planned out all the branches of all the conversation. But this was just like a person talking about their life. And this really showed that the AI had got to the point where we could successfully index all this natural language content in a way that felt like a real conversation.
It's a really cool use of the technology.
Yeah.
Kind of like a heavy thing to do, but really important to record those stories. Like, I think that that's what's so inspiring to me about the current age of AI is the ability to now do even more things like that. Like a couple months ago, we had somebody on the podcast who is using ChatGPT and a couple other language models to develop data sets for Quechua, which is like a small language spoken in the Yucatan. And we got a ton of feedback on that from people who either, spoke Quechua or their grandpa spoke Quechua. Like, it's an amazing way to preserve memories.
Yeah. And I know Spencer and I have talked a lot about the incredible power that AI is now bringing to the table of preserving true knowledge. Kind of what you're saying, Valorie, that it's not just facts on a page, it's preserving the emotion, it's preserving the facts, and it makes history, hopefully, we don't repeat mistakes we've made in the past if we're actually tied to those through experience. I think that's amazing. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think the difference is sort of authenticity. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Like, there's a difference between going and reading a Wikipedia page about like D-Day and talking to someone who was on D-Day who can then tell you, like, this is how it smelled. This is how it felt. This is the feelings that I went through as I was doing that. And often right now, if you just talk to like GPT and say, like, tell me about D-Day, it spits out a piece of text that reads a lot like the Wikipedia page. And even if you do like customize those models, you have to be very careful about the guardrails that you put in place to make sure that it's not spitting out something that's incorrect or is not factually accurate.
Yeah, I think that anyone right now, I think that most people using LLMs with any sensitive topic are going to end up disappointed. It's too hard to build those barriers strong enough. So I'm curious. So you've been obviously in the AI game for a long time now, long before, AI arose as like the singular buzzword of choice. What's been kind of what do you think was the biggest sort of step change for what you guys are doing at StoryFile? Was it more recent developments with transformers, or is it based on some of the older, neural net technology and et cetera?
A lot of the basic technology which we're doing is more retrieval-based AI. Using language encoders to match text. So like matching questions and answers, matching questions with the transcripts, to find the best video response. Now, I think generative AI still plays a huge role in what we're doing in several ways. Partly, we can use AI to sort of train and test the system. Like, you can end up having AI talking to AI, generating the questions to make sure that you have all the gaps and build in have all the bits of the conversation that you need. You can use AI to actually give real-time feedback as you're doing the interview to say, what could you do to be more eloquent? What could you do to actually tell a better story? Because not everyone is a natural storyteller. So that sort of hybrid approach of using GPT and large language models to make you a better storyteller and enhance the story file, it allows us to turn around these interviews in a much, much shorter time than we did 10 years ago. Like 10 years ago, it was a year-long project to really capture Pincus. And now this is something that you can jump on your web camera and do it in minutes and have something uploaded to the cloud that you can talk to. Now, you still have to plan out your story, know what you're going to say, but all of that is a lot faster than you could do before.
Yeah, it's amazing, the efficiency gains. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. I was just going to ask, as far as use cases up to this point for StoryFile, obviously you've mentioned Holocaust survivors, some educational. I'm curious, I was reading about StoryFile, I was like, it'd be so cool in the classroom to have things like the Holocaust survivors while you're learning about World War II when you're in your English class, you can talk to Shakespeare about, whatever story. Obviously we can't interview Shakespeare. What is that possible yet to have like a lifelike interaction with a deceased person? More historical.
The technology is there. There's several different approaches, and I think it's a different question if you're dealing with someone in the near past where there's a lot of reference material versus someone who's like Shakespeare. We did a project with the Walmart company where we created a digital Sam Walton, who was no longer around to be interviewed, but we could work closely with the family who had a lot of there's letters that he'd written, speeches that he had given, and we could actually use digital recreation technology to take an actor and make them look like Sam Walton, but everything that he said was actually something that he had spoken about sometime in the past. It was all approved by the family. So we still consider that to be a very authentic interview. Actually, when we showed it to the family, the only thing that they could check is like, well, the way he tied his tie, like he had a slightly different knot. But other than that, it sounded like him. We could create different voice models based on what did 1980s Sam Walton sound like, or 1990s Sam Walton sound like, or what does he sound like when he's doing public speaking versus speaking in a small crowd. If you're thinking about William Shakespeare, well, there's no voice reference of what he sounded like.
Yeah.
There's some statues, most of which were not actually made during his lifetime, so may or may not actually represent what his likeness. If you actually were to talk about his mannerisms, his gestures, that is pure speculation. So yes, there's lots of stuff written about Shakespeare, but not really much in the first person. So you could, I mean, a lot of the things where you see a digital Shakespeare, they're taking books or digital Mark Twain, they're taking his books and they're doing document retrieval to extract text about them and make something like a chatbot, but it doesn't really have the same feeling of meeting them face to face.
Yeah. And that's that authenticity you touched on there.
Yeah. You're, at some point, you're hallucinating something because the information is not there. And I think that hallucination is going to get better and better. So you would feel it like you could be like, this feels like a real person, and I believe that it is Shakespeare. Now, if I was doing the same hallucination and it was your grandmother, you would be like, this isn't my grandmother. She didn't speak like that.
Yeah.
It's also about what's your frame of reference, in addition to, is this truthful? Is this historically accurate?
Another question I had for you guys. So there's been obviously a lot of video models coming out recently, and they're very far from having good lip syncing and lifelike dialogue, etc. But have you guys considered using any of those generative video models in your product? Do you think that they would have a place in something like your product, or do you view those as more like an artistic tool?
We have had story files that have been made purely using video synthesis. If you go to the SafeLight website, they have a help center, and it's all using synthetic video. I think using Synthesia as to generate the video generation. Now, I don't think you would look at that and believe like, yes, this is a real person. But in the case of a customer service space where you don't have that real human reference, I think there's a more willingness to have synthetic humans.
We kind of have that already in our customer service trainings.
We have done computer graphics in other areas. Like we did an interview with a child survivor, the Inga Project, where as a survivor was talking about her history, we animated her memories around her, so that you could actually go in VR and you would see her parents being arrested. You would see Crystal Nuts, where everything was set on fire. But it was told through the perspective of a child, where a lot of these things could be non-realistic. So, see, there's lots of places where generative AI could help. I mean, in a lot of cases, it can automate the boring stuff, like what's your listening pose? What do you look like when you're just like waiting for someone to talk? All the small talk, all the things that are the glue of the conversation, but maybe not the things that are the heart of your story. I think those are the things that you can we'll be able to simulate first and still not lose that authenticity.
Yeah. So with like that authenticity, how do you, with, let's say someone asks a question that wasn't asked to the individual,
Yeah.
what happens with the technology? Does it just try to match it, or does it have a response of some kind?
I mean, it will try and match it. If there's really nothing there, what we try and have is sort of active redirects, where it will say like, that's a great question, but I'd really love to talk to you about AI. I'd really love to talk to you about my company, and sort of redirect you back to the conversation. The other thing that we're looking at is sort of having that sort of document retrieval. So if you, the StoryFile could redirect and say like, that's a great question, but if you go look at this article, you can find out more about that particular topic. Or if you look at a museum, like, that's a great question, but if you walk down the hall, there's a great exhibit where you can find out more about the end of the war. Those sort of redirects. One person isn't going to have the answer to everything.
And so you keep coming back to this word authenticity. I'd be really curious to hear from your perspective, what do you think are the kind of ethical limitations of technology like this? That's kind of a broad question. Maybe we can narrow it slightly. What do you think are the ethical implications of using it to simulate living humans?
Yeah, I think a large part of it is, are you doing this with the permission of the person who you are simulating? And this is something that like the legal space is only really just starting to crack with some of the privacy laws that are coming out. The technology is still way ahead of where the laws are going. Some of that I think is going to be digital watermarking, things like the Content Authenticity Initiative, which is a alliance of companies which were part of, but led by Adobe, where ideally everything from when content is captured through to every time a filter is applied to it, it's watermarked every stage of the process. So you can see this is how it was modified. Those sort of things are going to help, but it is a very slippery slope, making sure that you're not saying something that wasn't appropriate. Like if I took Shakespeare, like I could make him say whatever he wants, but then who owns Shakespeare? And I think a lot of the legal stuff right now is about like, if I am recording a story, how do I pass on those rights to my family members? Who gets to make those decisions for me after I'm gone? And a lot of the work that's happening around actors' rights in California are sort of hammering out that very cutting edge questions.
It's a weird question to have to contend with in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead. Sorry, what were you saying?
Okay, go ahead. Like putting like your digital rights into your will is something that I think we're all going to have to be thinking about.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's already, California just signed, I'm forgetting the law, but basically now by law you have to get permission to use a digital clone of, Matthew McConaughey. You can't just go use it, which is just funny to think about, but it's like, of course you should own your face, your voice, your body, even if it is a digital version. But man, how do you, it's going to be very interesting to see how that's monitored and enforced.
Yeah. I mean,
what do you do if you have,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to make a joke. Like, what do you do if you happen to be the guy who looks exactly like Matthew McConaughey?
Yeah, exactly.
Your face is now illegal. Yeah. Sorry, Valerie, what were you going to say?
That's good. This came up a lot like 15 years ago when we were scanning actors for these big budget movies, because actually whenever we scanned an actor for a movie, they were owned by the studio. So we actually ended up scanning The Rock, I think, 4 different times for 4 different movies, whether it was like Fast and the Furious or the one where he was a double. And I was always surprised about actors not owning it. And I think the only actress at the time who I knew was aware of that was Sigourney Weaver, because she'd been doing it since Aliens. And now, like, this is something that everyone is in that community is really aware of. And I think soon we're going to be aware of it, just all of us, even if we're not professional voice actors or visual actors.
I thought you were going to say you had to scan The Rock 4 times because he was so big, but that makes sense. 4 different studios.
He is massive, and yeah.
So if you,
So
oh, go ahead,
go ahead,
Spencer.
Jake. No, you got it.
I was gonna ask you, Valorie, if you could water down, if you could summarize the goal, the mission of StoryFile, what you are trying to do there, what would you say that is?
I think ultimately my goal is it's about bringing people together. Like, so many times the digital technology is actually making us feel more isolated. We're sitting in our rooms, just not interacting with anyone else. So anytime you can get people to talk to someone who they wouldn't normally meet, and you're really breaking out of that little bubble that we're putting ourselves in, and ideally talking to people who maybe you don't usually identify with. So a lot of this is really just like trying to, like, as a communication tool, not just for like the elites, not just for historical figures, but ideally that everyone can record their story and use it as a sort of communication multiplier. That's all. That's my ultimate.
I like that a lot because just in, I think it was even just 2 episodes ago, Jake and I were talking about exactly what you touched on, that a lot of technology recently has led to more atomization and isolation. And it's exciting to see things like StoryFile that focus on bringing those social connections back into play. I too think that there's a lot of potential in AI for that purpose. And every day I feel like I wake up and I see like a new AI product that I hate. And I always love seeing ones that I like and ones that promote social cohesion, because the ones that I hate are always like, it's like the AI girlfriend, or, I saw one today that was like a fully AI generated social network you get on and you got, 1,000 AI generated followers. And it's like, that's dystopian. That's weird. It's interesting to a degree, but it's not a good product.
Right.
So it's really exciting to see things like this going forward with StoryFile. What is kind of like the next step for you guys?
In the short term, it's really making the conversational experience feel more intuitive, making it feel like the StoryFile can sort of guide you to the golden nuggets of information. Like if I'm actually having a conversation with a person, I have like sort of this like internal agenda of like where I want the conversation to go. And each of you have a little internal agenda of where you want the conversation to go. And you're going to sort of every step of the conversation try and push it and nudge it towards that sort of conversation. In traditional like linear video, like if I'm making a movie, all of that control really lies with the editor and the director. They're going to carefully line up all those pieces to lead to that payoff, the sort of that nice narrative arc. And in conversation, it's really it's a give and flow to make that arc. And I think in a natural conversation with an AI agent, having that concept of building narrative is really the next thing. So like you have a conversation and like figuring out, well, what comes next that builds on that and builds you to that amazing story. Like almost every time we do an interview, there's some point in the interview where you're like, your mouth just drops. You're like, wow, I didn't ever imagine that. It could be like the time the Holocaust survivor like just escaped, or like met their family member, or that story when you're talking to your grandparents and they say something like, I never knew that. Like, like that. Those are the amazing bits. But that you don't lead with that story. You start with the small talk and you build in and build in, and then you get to that golden nugget. So I think that's really the next thing that we're working on. Ultimately, then after that, it's how do we just make these tools more accessible? Like we want everyone to be able to go in, create these tools, leverage all of the existing videos that they might already have lying around in order to create these sort of interactive experiences.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Here's a question for you, Valorie, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. There's so many tools being built now. Spencer mentioned AI girlfriends. Obviously, everything StoryFile is working on. Do you think at this point, can a human being get the same payoff from a conversation with an AI that they can with another human being? if that makes sense.
Don't think we're quite there yet. Like, I think humans have such an amazing ability to improvise and to make connections that AI doesn't quite have it. Now, do I think AI can pass the Turing test? Yes. I mean, AI. I mean, we're getting to the point where AI can fake being human, but would I say it's as good as a real human conversation? Like, not yet. And that's from a straight just narrative point. I do think we're getting to the point where, again, also visually, that we can. The synthetic video is getting to the point where it's going to be in. I mean, with work, we can. It's already indistinguishable from humans, but for like the real-time synthesis, like there's still some stuff missing in the eyes and in the lip motion. The expresses, like being able to synthesize the emotions on the fly are not quite there, but that's going to come really, really quickly. It's the missing bit is really like all that human element, and how do you download all the knowledge that's in a real human into that digital avatar? Like, if I ask you, like, you might suddenly realize, like, oh, there was that time when I was 6 and that was a really amazing story, and I've never told anyone about that in my life, and it's relevant to this conversation. How can we, again, getting back to making it for everyone, how can we use AI to interview you and extract as much of that essence of you? And the more we can extract from that, the better agent we can create. But we're never going to be able to extract all of it.
Yeah.
And even if we extract all of it now, the version of you next week is going to be different. You're going to have new experiences that you made over this next week that the AI is never going to catch up. So it's a simulation of you, but it's still not
Interesting.
pure, constantly evolving version of you. I was getting very philosophical, but yeah.
No, that's what I love about AI is it touches on these philosophical subjects.
Yes.
I think it's exciting when technology touches on really tough topics and really hard questions to answer, because it means that it's going somewhere interesting. With all the recent progress, has there ever been a moment for you that you felt like maybe this is moving too fast, or are you mostly just excited?
I mean, I'm amazed about how fast the technology is moving and the potential for the AI to become like efficiency sort of enhancers, like taking our brain and making it more efficient, enhancing our imagination, all those things. The things that are scary, obviously, is that the lack of control, whether it's the using, it's always much easier to fake something than it is to prove that it's wrong. It's like the fact checking is harder than the faking, and the better classifier that you have for figuring out if something's fake or not, that just allows you to train a better model that can do an even better solution without that will for more people. So that element is a little scary, but overall I'm excited that like there's still a long way for these AI models to go. Like we still have not reached like the maximum accuracy of these models. Like we haven't got to like the fundamental entropy of the language that the language model, because it's a really complicated thing. So academically, it's like it's gonna be fascinating for a long time.
Yeah. I'm curious, Valorie, if obviously the advent of all these various AI tools for every use case, I mean, maybe not quite, but almost every use case you can imagine. What tools do you use in your, whether it's professionally or just in your day-to-day life? Do you have favorite tools that you like to rely on or use?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm always using, or the standard was using GPT or assistance based on GPT to always try and improve my language, make me more succinct. That's fairly standard. I'm really excited about some of the tools for using AI for coding. Just that I mean, the worst part of coding has always been debugging and trying to find like the tedious reading of all these manuals, and that AI can do that for you so much better that you can focus on the creative aspect of these sort of processes. Those are using, I mean, but like it seems like every week there's a new assistant or a new coding generator that I'm not going to recommend just one.
Yeah.
But as AI gets more higher level reasoning, it's going to be interesting. Like when are we going to have the first AI CTO that like is actually making like writing out your roadmap for you and saying like these are the things where like this market trend is going on, that's what's going to happen next. I think my favorite tool I've actually used recently is Google just came out with a project that will summarize papers for you. I think it's Inspiration, where they've taken an ArcSIF paper and it will turn it into a podcast, and you can listen to people
That's
talking
really cool.
talking about the paper. Because I'm always like,
fascinating.
I never have time to like read all these papers, and it will actually convert that into an AI conversation for you. So
that's cool.
That's my tool of the week that I'm playing with.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check
that
that
reminds
one out
me,
for sure.
There's some TikToks that go around that will take like discussions on linear algebra or something like that, and it'll just be straight reading a textbook, but it'll be like Donald Trump's voice or something like that, and Joe Biden is asking him questions. Just absurd. But that's one little thing that I am really excited about AI for, is just like little silly things like that. I think are so funny. But that's just a little petty thing. I'm curious, do you have any story files that would be interesting to show on screen?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go talk to a story file. So hopefully you can see this. So this is, well, actually, I was going to tell you who it is, but why don't I have him introduce himself? Tell me about yourself.
I'm Andrew J. Young, Jr., and I was born in New Orleans. I went to college at Howard University. I went to theological seminary in Hartford, Connecticut, at Hartford Theological Seminary.
I think it might be breaking up a little. I apologize.
It was coming through clear for us.
Oh, okay. Anyway, this is Ambassador Andrew Young. He worked with Martin Luther King. He was a congressional representative. He was an ambassador appointed by Jimmy Carter. So you can ask him all about Martin Luther King. Let's just try and ask him a question about Martin Luther King. Were you there the day that Martin Luther King was shot?
After the violence occurred in that march, we moved our staff from across the South all into Memphis, and we discovered that the march had been sabotaged. We didn't know by who, and we didn't care, but we were determined that we had to have to have another march.
I'm not quite sure if he was going to end up getting back to the. So I mean, part of talking to a story file is that they end up being a bit like politicians. So they may or may not answer the question that you actually want them to ask.
Yeah, I love you. Really, we've talked about authenticity a lot, but you get the feeling from him, just like the humility of this man, where he's mentioning these titles he was given, and just kind of gesture. They gave me the vice president, and he just kind of like waves it off. Like, I love those little gems where you see like, okay, like just by the way he's acting, you see the way, his personality and who he is. I love that.
I mean, he's a very he's been working on these causes for so long, and I'm passionate about them, and you can. I mean, I didn't rehearse any of these questions, so these aren't necessarily questions that were asked specifically in the interview. It's matching questions to other questions in the database. we actually ask him questions about like modern politics, like have you ever considered running for president?
No. No, I really never considered running for anything. I decided that if there was a purpose for my life, I would know it one day at a time. And I have done the things that I have been led to do, but I haven't gone looking for trouble.
Wow,
So yeah, that's kind of his entire approach to life, I think.
that's really cool.
That's awesome.
I just want to go talk to story files all day.
Yeah, I mean the amazing one of the amazing thing I found with StoryFiles is that you can talk and get sucked into this long conversation, but sometimes we actually have people like you talk to a StoryFile and then you get to meet the person in real life, and
Oh wow, yeah.
you come into this feeling like I already know this person, and then they can be like, wait, do I know you? But in a lot of cases, that can be really useful. Like it's you've already broken the ice, or your digital version of yourself has already broken the ice because you feel
Right.
like you have this personal connection already.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Valorie.
Yeah.
Sure.
So if someone wanted to talk to story files, how would someone do that?
So yeah, we have, I think, Andrew Young and some of our other civil rights leaders on our website, which is storyfile.com. There's also a lot of these story files are in museums around the country. We've just opened up exhibits with the World War II Museum in New Orleans, where there's 18 World War II veterans that you can go talk to. We're going to be opening up a project with the Medal of Honor Museum in
Wow.
Dallas, where there's going to be Medal of Honor recipients you can talk to. If you're here in LA, you can go to the Japanese American Museum, where you can talk to George Takei, and you can talk to other people who were part of the internment camps in World War II. So there's lots and lots of museums around the country where you can do it. Or you can go to their websites, and often these story files are going to be on their websites because you can talk to a story file on your phone, on your computer, anywhere.
Okay. Awesome.
I think that, Jake, do you have any more questions?
I just had one come to mind actually,
Yeah.
Valorie, and this
Okay.
is not totally related to StoryFile, but we've talked to so many founders that are, bootstrapping things. They want to build an AI company, or they want to jump in with an AI company. And I feel like you're there, like you're the CTO of this amazing company with a great cause using AI. Is there any advice you would give to these founders of just in general, whatever comes to mind? I'd love to hear.
I mean, I think the first thing is really following something that you're passionate about. You've other people said this, but like when you're starting a startup, you work harder than any other job I've ever had in my life, and you're willing to do that because you really care about this. And in my case, though, like it wasn't just about being passionate about the technology, but it's passionate about like the stories and the people whose stories that you're sharing. So I realized it wasn't necessarily about having like the biggest, flashiest graphics. It was about how could we build these human connections. The other advice I have is really all about mentorship. The only reason I can get to where I am is I've had some really, really good mentors out there who've sort of shown modeled leadership. In my case, it was people like Mark Bolas, who was a pioneer in VR space, and back in the last 30 years, who went and worked at Microsoft, is now a professor at USC. I also worked at a previous startup so I got to see like how a good startup works. Like because diving into it, you're going to make lots and lots of mistakes, particularly like the first time around. So going through that experience of seeing people who've navigated really helped. And I think the biggest lesson I learned from them was that you really need to focus. Like it's so easy to like be distracted by every new changing thing, but it's better to do one thing and do it really, really well. And that's what we've tried to do. Not always successfully, but that's our guiding light.
Your passion
that's great advice.
for the work, for your work and the stories, it really comes through in the way you talk about it. Very impressed with what you guys are doing.
Yeah. Valorie, if people want to follow you, follow StoryFile, learn more, what's the best avenues for them to do that? Social media, websites, what would someone go to?
I would say people should come and reach out to me on LinkedIn, Val Jones on LinkedIn, or come to storyfile.com and send us an email. I mean, you can reach out to us on the website, send us questions, send us cool ideas and new potential applications of the technology, and we'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Valorie.